Hello, everyone. So, Hungary continues to oppose the EU aid package for Ukraine, much like US House Republicans continue to oppose US aid package to Ukraine. And in both those cases, there's no use relying on international organizations. In the past, UN may have persuaded them, but I think there is little chance of that at present. Now, there is a summit coming up tomorrow to discuss this very thing, but I don't know what their plan is when it comes to persuading Hungary to stop, throwing a wrench in the whole thing. What I don't understand is why Hungary is bothering to be a member of the EU if it's going to be going against EU's principles and EU's policy. If they miss the Soviet times so much, they're free to leave the European Union and go back to that way of life. As I mentioned before, it surprises me to no end that Hungary, having been one of the countries of the socialist bloc, is in that state that they are basically reverting to that very Soviet way of life. We'll see. I don't have very high hopes, but maybe other members of the EU have something up their sleeve that we don't know about. We'll see. The reason I said there's not much hope at this point for UN doing anything is this. And at this point, it's not just the Israeli intelligence that indicates that 10% of the UN members who are supposed to be responsible for delivering and distributing humanitarian aid to Palestine were actually in touch with Hamas and possibly participated directly in the October 7th attacks. So there's now apparently a full-on investigation. Multiple countries have suspended their contributions to that particular part of the UN. And basically, if an organization or part of the organization supports one terrorist nation, one terrorist organization such as Hamas, what's stopping it from supporting and acting in the interests of another terrorist state such as Russia? Which is why I have given up on the UN at this point. I don't think they're capable of doing anything for checking Russia. And I am kind of wondering how long it's going to take before people are going to start dropping out of the UN and use other alliances such as NATO, for example, instead. Ukraine's allies, inside and outside of NATO, had some hopes that they might attract China to the conversation about facilitating some type of interaction between Russia and Ukraine. China's defense minister basically told Ukrainian government that they will continue to support Russia when it comes to Ukrainian question. Now, those words, Ukrainian question, they give me pause because that rhetoric reminds me of the racist rhetoric and Nazi rhetoric when people were talking about the slavery question or the black question or the Jewish question. And some people might say, oh, you're overreacting, those are just words. No, I'm not. These are words spoken in a highly charged political situation by a very high-ranking official representing his country. And so everything he does and everything he says in that context is important. So I'm not overreacting. This is bad. The long-awaited, long-anticipated prisoner exchange between Russia and Ukraine did in fact take place, although it is still unclear what the heck was going on and who and what was aboard that crashed airplane. Now, this is interesting. So, first of all, while it is true that Putin's opponent, Boris Nadezhdin, said that he opposes the war in Ukraine, he also said that he does not intend to withdraw Russian troops immediately from the invaded territories, but that he wants to hold a referendum. Unclear why. As I mentioned before, the only referendum that should matter is the one that took place in Ukraine in August of 1991, where Ukraine stated very clearly, 92%, that it wants to be its own country. So that is all the referendum you should need. So when they're calling him anti-war, that doesn't mean he's pro-Ukraine. It means that he is pro, let's reduce the inconvenience to Russia. Next, Russia is already saying that the West plans to interfere in the elections. As I told you before, let's flip it. Nobody gives a shit. Because everybody knows the elections are already as rigged as possible. We know Putin's going to win. There's some amusing numbers from last elections, and it's hilarious. Basically, what they were showing is that the number of votes cast for Putin in the earlier elections was higher than the number of registered voters in certain regions. So, it's useless to try and do anything. But what it does suggest to me is that if the turnout is not as big as he expects, or anything goes not to his liking, he's going to blame the West. And this also indicates that he himself has plans to interfere in our elections later this year. Now, it's true, I agree with the former CIA director William Burns when he says that war in Ukraine has weakened Putin. Unfortunately, not enough to overthrow him. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest problems in Russia is lack of coordinated, organized effort. So much so that one of the popular trends among Russian opposition, if you can call it that, is complaining that Ukrainians wouldn't come over to Moscow and do like what they did in the Maidan demonstrations all those years ago, 10 years ago. So that gives you an idea just how lame their opposition is. And army, the state of the army continues to be a concern in Ukraine for obvious reasons. The soldiers that have been serving since 2 years ago, including some of the wounded who basically recovered and then went back right away, they're exhausted. And it's difficult to attract new soldiers because the war goes on and that high peak of patriotism is replaced with fear. Again, it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. There is no hope of getting additional troops from anywhere else, UN included, so Ukraine really is forced to do this on its own, despite the fact that the interests it protects are far from local.